In our newest episode of the Navigating the UK Skills Challenges podcast, we're bringing you first-hand insights from our Young Learner Advisory team. They'll share their experiences of the education system and how prepared they felt to enter employment on leaving education. Get ready to hear their innovative suggestions for employers and educators alike. So welcome to Kira and Rob, and thank you so much for joining us today. Also with us is Hilary Gwilliam, our employability skills expert. Employability skills are being discussed by employers, training providers, and even politicians. They are identified as a key challenge within the local skills improvement plans. We aim to gain insight into the broader perspective of young people, given indications of varying expectations across the multi-generational workforce. So let's start off the conversation with a broad question, and I'm going to hand over to Eric.
Employers mention employability skills as a need in every LSIP report. But from a young person's standpoint, what is employability?
For me, employability and sort of employability skills is setting young people up with necessary skills to survive out in employment. It's about getting them ready to go out in sort of the big wide world of employment, which can be quite daunting.
Thank you, Rob. Over to you, Kira.
I agree, but I also think it's like interviewing, applying for jobs, being able to secure a job, that kind of thing, because it's so different to how like our parents and grandparents navigated it now that I think kids need that external support.
Can I just pitch in there with a sort of wider question on this? When you left college or university or you left your sort of learning and you started to apply for your first jobs, how ready and well prepared did you feel for work in terms of your own employability skills?
I'm going to say no. It felt very much like when I was in college that they wanted me to go to university. We didn't really have a lot of employability lessons. And in university, we did have like one module which was about professional skills. And it was just how to build a CV and a portfolio. And that was about it. It was nothing about like the world of work or how to apply for a job, where to look for jobs, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Wow. And Rob, what about you?
For me personally, I definitely felt underprepared for going into full-time employment. I also think it depends what course you studied. I think some courses can naturally set you up with good employment skills. And I think some courses don't put that much effort in because it's perhaps not in those course units that we have to deliver.
Hilary, have you got any thoughts on this as an employability expert?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about what we mean by employability. So I think it's always clear what we understand technical skills to be. So if you want to go into a particular vocation, it's quite clear that we go into a learning environment to learn and practice and perfect some of those skills that we're going to need. But we don't always think about what else we need. And that could be anything really, from an attitude, a value, a behaviour, some attributes, and then some sort of more tangible employability skills as well. So I think there's a really big range of things we might need than the technical skills, and we tend to lump them all together and call them employability skills, but actually it's a set of different things that help us to transition from a learning environment to a working environment. And we need to think carefully about, as Robert said, the sector that we're going into. They're all different.
Great, Hilary, thanks. Just broadening out on that even further, actually, we talk about employability skills, and obviously those sort of skills came up again and again in the local skills improvement plans. But as part of that employability skills need, one of the skills that came up again and again was communication skills. And what was interesting, and I think you've all picked up on that slightly here, was the expectation of employers versus young people when it came to communication skills and the style of language used, for example. What was your experience of this when you first started working, Kira?
Yeah, there's always differences, and like how I kind of found it was your tone matters quite a lot. Obviously, that's normal in every kind of conversation, but definitely in work. So if I'm working with a co-worker who's younger, I'll have a different kind of language and terminology. I'll even like sit back in my chair on a meeting, or I'll be a bit more slouched. But when I'm talking to my boss and older workers, I tend to sit forward. Might even dress a different way. Like I've got quite a few tattoos, so if I'm talking or presenting to people that I know that are a little bit more formal, I'll be, wearing long sleeves, or I would hide them. And even in our emails and our Slack messages, like we use emojis, we use different terminology than if I was talking to someone that I see as in a more formal light.
Wow, so that flows across into your written communication as well as your spoken communication, dependent on the age of the person you're speaking to, or is it a level of seniority, or is it an age thing, do you think?
I think it generally just depends on the person. If they're in a position of authority, obviously I will be talking to them in a more formal manner. With clients and customers in that aspect as well, there's a completely different language that I use when I'm speaking to them, and I'm very, very careful with my words. And then with my other colleagues, I'm still careful because obviously I don't want to say anything that could get me into trouble. But also I'm a lot less formal because I can relate to them a bit more.
So do you think some of your communication, the way that you communicate, some of that comes from your use of social media as you were growing up?
Yeah.
Rob, what about you?
Communication-wise, I think it all depends on the message you're trying to portray and, again, who you're speaking to. And I think the question that you had towards the end about social media has got a lot to answer for in terms of how young people see communication and how perhaps older people see communication. And it is very different.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Eric, is there any question you want to ask?
Yeah, really well timed. I was in a meeting earlier with some organisations and we briefly went into employability skills and communication in particular. And one of their big comments was it's not even necessarily on the communication style and how you speak to each other. It's what they use to communicate. So one of them complained that often if they try and get in touch with one of their younger employees, they'll try to give them a phone call and they'll just flat out reject it and say, like, send me a message instead. So it's that style differences. So do you find there's a difference in preference in communication between younger and older people?
Yes, personally, I quite like chatting to people. So for me, it's a phone call every day. And literally, I'm relatively impatient at work. So if I sort of send an email, I'm then following it up with a phone call going, I've just sent you an email. What do you think about this? Can I have an answer with this? Part of my job's about getting quotations and that. I much prefer to speak to a supplier to get a quote. However, some younger people I work with are scared to pick up the phone. They're scared to answer the phone. They will send an email and I'll go, have you chased this up with a phone call? Oh no, I've just sent them an email about an hour ago. I'll wait until I get a response. It is as if they are scared to pick up the phone and scared to communicate.
I'd say, like, for me, I'm not a massive fan of phone calls. I'm not scared of them. I will do it if I need to. But I do prefer emails or messages purely because of the fact that with my job, because I work in manufacturing as well, if a client asks me a question, if they ask me on the phone, I'm like, I might have to get back to you on that. Whereas if it's on an email, I can quickly get all the information I need, put it all in that email, and then that can be sent, and then the conversation can, like, jump forward quite quickly. And another part of my job is cold calling. So I call a lot of buyers, I call a lot of, producers, that kind of thing. And that can be a bit daunting because you just start jumping on the phone and you're talking to a stranger. But yeah, the emails is just the preferred way at the moment. I think it just depends on the person.
Do you think that, your college or university or school prepared you effectively for the different types and styles of communication you were going to have to use?
English class, I remember, had like an email writing or a letter writing class, but that was it, basically. And there's nothing really.
Rob?
No, I don't think I was well supported with different types of communication skills. Some students take functional skills, and I think that program is good for some communication skills. There's a lot of that seems to be write a letter to such and such to complain, or write a letter to such and such to appraise them, or write an email, stuff like that. So I think that's naturally getting them ready, but not everyone's taking functional skills English.
Yeah. Hilary, I know that you'll have something to say about that from the functional skills point of view, because there's obviously a difference between functional skills, and those are the skills that we need to apply in the workplace, and the sort of English that we might have learned during, say, a GCSE. What's your views on that?
Well, it's a bit like how we define employability skills. It's a big mixture of different skill sets that have to be adapted, I think, to the audience that you're working with. So it's a bit like you mentioned earlier, Kira, really. And so if you just break down, reading, writing, listening and speaking as 4 quite important skill areas, it's really about how you adapt those to the people you're working with, making sure you are able to articulate yourself clearly, And that might be using different modes of communication. So you may be a face-to-face person, or you may be an email person, or if you're working on Teams and you just want to send somebody a message. And actually we have to get used to often using all of those things. I think also being conscious that that form of communication involves a little bit of reading between the lines. And that's an important part of receiving communication, isn't it? Sometimes it's important to be able to listen actively and take instruction, isn't it? And take advice and give it as well sometimes. And also it moves across sometimes into things like empathy. Again, that's part of listening and understanding. And sometimes it also creeps across into things just like friendliness and warmth and the body language that you demonstrate. So it's a complicated thing, communication.
So following up with that, Hilary, some of what you've just described and what Rob and Kira have described are skills that I think you learn throughout your working life and you refine throughout your working life. So as part of our LSEP analysis, we definitely notice that there's very high expectations from employers of the types of employability skills that someone will walk into the workplace as a young person who may be entering their first job and almost be oven ready to perform at quite a high level. Do you think that employers might have unrealistic expectations of what employability skills can be delivered by a training provider? Is there a level of learning that has to take place at work?
I think it depends a little bit on the sector again. So I think there will be different expectations according to the type of work you want to move into. And those experts who are working with you at college or university or at school are often experts and professionals from that sector. So they'll have a good understanding of the types of skills you're going to need for work. But when you think back, I was thinking about some of the points that Kira and Robert made, and we talked about working with different age groups, and most workplaces now have potentially 4 or 5 different generations of people working in them. So I think it's a little bit about how to understand what your sector expects and think about the sorts of things you'd expect to treat yourself in the workplace, I think.
No, definitely. Thank you, Hilary. It's always interesting to get the different generational perspectives. So with that, I spend a lot of time on TikTok. There's a few videos up lately which really demonstrate quite clearly the difference in opinions that young people and employers might have on how the workplace should look and should function. As we mentioned earlier in the session, there seems to be a cultural or maybe a generational divide between employers and Gen Z, millennials, on how the workplace should look. Have you experienced or noted this? And if so, what type of challenges can this lead to?
I think there are certainly challenges. Working in FE, there's not a different expectation, but there sort of is in a way of an elder lecturer compared to a younger lecturer. And I think it's about the rapport that you build up with young people, and then with the communication aspects of that, you're then a role model to them. So you need to think about how you're communicating to them. Employers do get involved at early stages, but I would personally question, do they get involved enough? Are they setting clear sort of expectations on what they want from training providers, colleges, universities, schools, and then how FE providers, HE providers, schools can help get younger people more employable?
I think there's a disconnect really between what you need in the workplace and about like what you need, what skills you need as well. Because when I left my education, my sitting guilds was the closest really to what the trade ended up being. Like my degree and everything else, they all kind of made it out to be this like big scary place where everybody's really serious and really like stuck up. And then I've gone into the work environment and I'm using different skills that I wasn't even taught, like technology skills and communication skills as well. And everybody acts a lot differently to what they set you up to. And I think, again, that's a generational thing in the sense of like how they view work is a lot more, not serious as such, but I think my generation's a little bit more laid back from what I've experienced anyway. The way we talk, the way we kind of operate, the work-life balance as well.
I think one of the really important things that you mentioned there was about work-life balance. And that's one thing we're seeing a lot. And one of the videos we kind of share around sometimes is the work-life balance is a priority for a lot of us now, particularly Gen Z, millennials, the newer generations. nowadays, if we're contracted 9 to 5, we work 9 to 5. And if they want beyond that, we may want remuneration for that, either money or time off in lieu, that type of thing. Do you find that to be the case? Do you think work-life balance is more important now for the newer generations? Is that really important to you when you look at new jobs?
I spoke to my nan, actually. So she said she was brought up that work kind of came before anything. We did have a bit of a debate because she was wondering why, for me, I'm very 9 to 5. So I start at 9, I have an hour's break, so I have exactly an hour, and I finish at 5. And if I do any overtime, I'm either paid for it or, it's taken off at the end of the week. I am invested in my job. And 2, I feel like a lot of young people at the moment, because of how politics are, like the fact, we're working, I am working for like pretty much minimum wage, and you're not able to afford rent or afford a car, or they won't be able to get a house. And we're finding that in education as well. A lot of teenagers are quite switched on to that. So they're like, why should I learn? Why should I get skills? I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm not going to be rich. I'm not going to be this. I'm not going to be able to get by in the world. So I think it's kind of a depressing look on it, but that's why a lot of young people are like, I'm contracted 9 to 5. I'll do my job well, but if you want me to work more, then obviously compensate me for it. Or, that's why the work-life balance is a bit different, I think, between the generations.
There's quite a lot written, isn't there, about the different sort of generations at work and, what motivates each group actually, and the different attitudes and behaviours that they bring to work. And I think that's quite interesting, and how important it is to be mindful as an employer, but as an employee as well, of those things.
I think you're completely right, Hilary. And one of the things that came out in the local skills improvement plans was that many employers have very set expectations of how young people are going to behave when they come into the workplace. And there is that expectation that, we'll tell you you're basically contracted to work 9 to 5. But if we ask you to come in regularly and work till 6 or start at 8 o'clock in the morning, so we've got early meetings, they just expect young people to do that. And young people's response is increasingly, well, actually, that's not what I'm contracted to do. But I think a lot of employers who are not, as Hilary's just said, making those adjustments and making those accommodations and taking on board that there are multi-generational differences. But actually, to make an office work, there are some real benefits to having that multi-generational workforce where, the younger people can teach the older people things that they've learned that we don't necessarily know, but also the older generations can teach younger people skills and knowledge that they may not know. Rob, is there anything you want to add to that at all?
Honestly, I go in with the attitude of work. I'm there, do my job, go and get paid, sort of thing. If I've got to work slightly later, I work slightly later. I know I've got a couple of deadlines coming up during Easter half term, which I've, at the moment, booked all off. I can foresee that I will have to go in, but it's sort of one of these things.
And you accept that as part of the job, and for you that's not an issue?
I don't think it's such an issue for me, because I've got a really good working relationship with my manager. So he appreciates that I'm going to come in during half term and I don't have to. And in return, I know I'm going to get something back.
So it's that appreciation and that flexibility that you get back that makes the difference.
100%. It's give and take, I think.
You're touching on some quite important things there around, which are skills in themselves, like self-management and time management skills. But you're also talking quite a lot about positivity, aren't we? And optimism, and how we need to keep buoyant at work. And yet actually times are quite tough. So again, it's sort of being mindful of that, isn't it, as both an employee and an employer, because they're critical, aren't they, to people being successful and feeling comfortable at work.
Join us next week for part 2 of the podcast, where we'll look at tips for hiring young individuals, emphasise the significance of work experience, and explore the obstacles to social mobility in accessing internships. Until then, goodbye for now.